So, for the past few weeks, we've been talking about a very simple, elementary subject, getting to know God. I mean, what could be simpler than getting to know God, right? And so, Pastor Chris has been walking us through what he's calling the 5 stages of faith. And so, the very last one, the 5th one, is the idea of paradox or mystery. So, if it's okay with you this morning, I want to hang out in mystery. Is everybody okay with that? If not, it's too late to back out. All right, you're already here. So, there was a professor who was widely known and respected, written many books, sought after. And any time they're teaching, whatever class they're teaching, as soon as enrollment opens, the class is immediately filled. People travel from all over to find this person. They seek out their videos. They seek out their content. And so they were going to do a one-night lecture. And so they arranged it and they set it up and they got the biggest room they could find to hold this lecture. And as soon as it opened up, it was filled to capacity and it was standing room only. People were crowded around, huddled up, listening to what this professor was getting ready to say. And this professor went through everything from philosophy to physics and did so with passion, was so excited and so knowledgeable and so open about it that not one person fell asleep in class. In fact, they were so passionate and it was so beautiful what they were saying that you could even see people in the crowd with tears in their eyes. And so for 2 or more hours, this professor is just pouring out everything. And people are attended to every word with rapt attention at every single thing. And then just when you thought this professor was getting ready to reveal the very mystery of the cosmos, she sat down at the desk and simply said, "Are there any questions?" And of course, there were many questions, dozens of questions, and hands shot up everywhere. And so they set microphones up in the aisles, and person after person just lined up to this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to be in this room at this moment and ask this person questions. And so one after one, they would come and ask. And she would listen to every question deeply, looking the person in the eyes. Yes, okay. And without fail, at the end of every question, she would pause and she would respond, "That's a great question. I don't know." And that's fine for the first couple of questions. In fact, people in the room are thinking, "Wow, she's so modest." And they're inspired. But person after person after person asking questions, and the response is the same each time. "I don't know." It's a great question. It's a beautiful question. It's a wonderful question, but I don't know. And so what was excitement and what was anticipation for this opportunity in this moment for many of the people in the room faded right before their eyes. And many people walked out of that room that day disappointed. Because we as humans have an allergy to something. We have an allergy to not knowing. We have this insatiable desire to know. We have questions and we want answers. And there are 3 words in our language that scare us more than anything else. I don't know. The only time we will use those words is when we have the opportunity to throw someone else under the bus. At work. "Why isn't this project done?" "I don't know. Ask Bob." And I apologize, Bob, if you're in the room. But we will not hesitate to throw out those words when we can get the responsibility off our shoulders and put it someone else. But when it comes to things that we want to know about, when it comes to questions we have, when it comes to fears, when it comes to what it means to be human, what life is all about, the idea of not being able to know is terrifying. And yet, here's the truth. And I don't know if you came to church to hear this morning, but I'm going to go ahead and ruin your Sunday. We don't know anything at the end of the day. We don't really know that much. In fact, there are some things that we used to know, and I'll just lob out a couple of them. The first one, we used to know that the earth was the center of our solar system. We knew that. That was a fact. That was a foregone conclusion. Of course, the earth is the center of our solar system. What else would be the case? And then people like Copernicus and a man named Galileo said, well, wait a minute. I get it, and I understand why we would think that, but I actually believe that the sun is the center of our solar system. That is how things are organized. And do you know what we did with this information? We sat Galileo down and we thanked him. Oh, thank you so much. No, here's what we did. The church, true story, almost killed him. Because he wouldn't stop saying this, we made him a heretic, and he was sentenced to the death penalty, and he was almost killed for the crime of saying you're wrong. But luckily and fortunately, we decided that was too harsh a punishment, and so we made him live on house arrest for the rest of his natural life. Because that's something that we used to know, and someone pulled the rug out from underneath us. Here's another thing that we used to know. We used to know, and we used to lean on doctors to tell us that, hey, women, smoking while you're pregnant is not only okay, it's actually a good thing. It helps keep the birth weight down, helps calm your nerves. So the doctor who would tell the woman this would walk into the room smoking. Oh, hi, Nancy. You're 6 months pregnant? Well, how's the smoking coming along? We used to know that smoking didn't hurt. It actually helped right up until the point where we no longer knew that was the case. And now, if you ever walk into a doctor's office and somebody's smoking, you need to get out immediately. There's a list that is too long to recount this morning of the things that we used to know that we no longer know. And it's terrifying, and we don't like it. It makes us uncomfortable, and especially as it relates to God and truth and what it means to be human. Because some of us have this notion that the great elevator man in the sky is either going to push the up button or the down button, depending on whether or not we're right about a list of things. And so the idea of not knowing about God is terrifying. So we come to church looking for all the answers, and we have a list of people that we want to tell us everything there is to know about God. And can I just be honest? It's a fool's errand. And there's a story in the Gospels that illustrates this. John chapter 9, which you should take the time to read, is a treasure trove of truth. And it starts off that Jesus is walking with his disciples, and they come across a blind beggar by the side of the road. And his disciples stop and say, Rabbi, we have a question. Is this man blind because his parents did something wrong, or because he did something wrong? Is this man cursed to live in blindness for his entire life because of a mistake his parents made, or was it him? That was the only category they had in their head for why this man could be living in blindness. Because this was a commonly held assumption in that time, that if someone had a deformity, if someone had a disability of some kind, if someone had a physical ailment, it wasn't just the result of how things shook out. Somewhere along the line in that family tree, there was sin, or there was rebellion, or there was wickedness. And this was God's doing to illustrate why we shouldn't veer from the path. And Jesus, listening to this question, just like Jesus always did, he paused and he came up with this beautiful theological response. And here's what he said. Neither. It has nothing to do with what his parents did or didn't do, and it has nothing to do with what he did or didn't do. In fact, what you are getting ready to experience is going to happen right before your eyes to the very glory of God. And then Jesus did something strange, as he often did. He spit in the dirt. And he made mud between his fingers, and he slammed this spit mud ball right on this guy's eyes. And then he said something which probably is a little bit offensive to a blind guy. Insult to injury, I need you to find your way to this pool called Siloam and wash the mud away, and then you will be healed. So you would have seen this man who you've passed in the street 100 times stumbling towards a water source with his eyes caked in mud. And Jesus did something right there that was against all the rules. He did two things in one swoop. It was the Sabbath day when this happened. In other words, nothing was supposed to be done. No work, no labor of any kind. And two of those forms would have been this. He made a medicinal substance. He made something right then and there. Rule 1, broken. Rule 2, you are not supposed to heal somebody on the Sabbath day. So in and on that moment, Jesus broke two laws right then and right there. And so the man comes back from this water source, eyes wide open, walking upright, and people are passing him in the street and they're doing a double take. Isn't that the man who's always on the corner begging for money? And people are like, no, that can't be. He's walking. You can see. He can see. It's clear that he's not blind. That's not the same guy. And finally, this formerly blind man has had enough of this, and he says, okay, guys, listen. It actually is me. I actually can see. And oh, by the way, I'm not deaf. I can hear you as well. And so the questions start to emerge. How is this possible? And they grab this man and they take him to the Pharisees. They take him to the knowing, religious, wise, intelligent, studied leaders of their day. And they say, here is a man who was born blind. He's not blind today. What's going on? Which is a fair question. And they ask the man, what happened here? Who is this person that did this to you? Who is it? And this is what the blind man said. I don't know. I haven't seen him. Which is the proper response, because it's true. Hadn't seen him just yet. But they're not satisfied with that answer, so they go to other people. And finally, they track down this man's parents, and they trot their son up to him and say, hey, your son was blind. He's not blind anymore. And they say, yep, that's our son. He's not blind. You're right about that. And so they ask the parents, how is this possible? To which the parents respond, why are you asking us? You should ask him. And so the question goes back around to this man. And they say, what do you think about this Jesus? Now, at this point in the story, the Pharisees are split. One group finds no way possible that such a wretched sinner who's broken the law could do anything to heal somebody. And yet on the other side is a group that's saying, well, listen, how could a sinner pull this off? How can this blind man not be blind anymore? And so they ask the man, what do you think of this Jesus? Is he a sinner? And the man responds, I don't know. I don't know if he's a sinner. I don't know if he's a saint. I don't know if he's God himself. Here's what I know. When I woke up this morning, it was like every other morning I've ever had in my life. But somehow standing before you now, it's different. Here's what I know. I was blind, but now I can see. I can't tell you the math. I don't know the formula. I don't know if it was a magic trick or witchcraft, and I don't even know if it's going to stick tomorrow when I wake up. But right here as I'm standing, I used to be blind, and I'm not blind anymore. Now, you would think that the appropriate response to this would be awe and wonder. You would think you would be staring at a group of Pharisees, watching tears well up in their eyes and fall down their cheeks as they are amazed by the miracle that has taken place right in front of them. But instead, they hunker down even more. This is not possible. This is wicked. This is wrong. And so the formerly blind man's challenging, well, how can this be sin? I can see. How can this be not of God when I am a walking miracle? To which they respond, how would you know? You yourself were born in sin. In other words, you've been blind your entire life because of sin. So who are you to tell us? We have studied. We know the scriptures. We know the law. In other words, we know how God works. And so later, Jesus finds the man again. And Jesus asks him, do you believe in the Son of Man? To which he responds, I don't know. I would love to get to know him. I would love to see him. And Jesus says, he's standing in front of you right now. And the man falls and worships him. And then Jesus says this, I entered this world to render judgment, to give sight to the blind, and to show those who think they see that they are blind. I want to hang on to that for a second. I came to give sight to the blind, and I also came to show those who think they see so well that they're actually blind. And the Pharisees are hanging around and they overhear this, and so they respond to Jesus very angrily, very frustrated. Are you saying that we're blind? How dare you? Who are you to tell us that we're blind? And then Jesus responds this way. If you were blind, you wouldn't be guilty. If you had this physical, if you could not see, we wouldn't be having this conversation. There would be nothing for you to worry about. And then he continues. But you remain guilty because you claim you can see. Listen to this. There's a blindness that is worse than physical blindness. Because at least with physical blindness, I'm well aware of my limitations. And even in my limitations, my other senses are heightened. And I can still experience life in a rich and meaningful way, even when I can't see my own hand in front of my face. But there's a blindness that is so much worse than physical blindness. And it's the blindness that comes when we think we know. When we think we have it figured out. When we think we fully understand the way the world works or the way God works or the way things should go and shouldn't go. I memorized these verses. I know how this is supposed to pan out. And Jesus looks these men in the face and says, there's a blindness worse than what you fear. So here's what happens in this story. We have three forms of blindness. The first is the disciples who are just ignorant because they've been handed information about the way things are. From a child age, they've been told this is how God operates. And so that was their held assumption. And Jesus carefully pulls the veil over their eyes. He cures their blindness right there in that moment. And then there's the physical blindness of this man who hasn't seen a thing in his entire life. But the third is a cutting, sharp judgment to a group of people that think they know how things are and the way they should be. And let me say this. We pick on the Pharisees a lot. They're always the bad guy in the story. But every single one of us sitting in this room has a Pharisee hanging out somewhere. Maybe tucked in a corner and hiding out. But there's a piece somewhere in all of us that thinks we have it figured out. That thinks we know. Or is spending all of our days trying to acquire knowledge so that we can finally calm our fears or satiate our pride. And to that Pharisee that's hanging out in all of us, Jesus is saying, it's not that simple. It's not that easy. And that desire, that need to know is actually blinding you. When we let go of our need to know, it's not an admission of ignorance. It's an openness to wonder. It's the path to amazement. It's the ability to see things in brighter, more beautiful fashion, so much so that every opportunity is a chance to be blown away. There's another problem with knowing. Familiarity leads to boredom. And it ultimately, in many ways, leads to contempt. And we see this in our human relationships. You know trouble is afoot when you think you know someone fully. When you have someone totally figured out. Been there, got that. I've heard that story before. Every single one of us has an uncle at the table at Thanksgiving who shares that same story he's told 1,000 times. I know Uncle Joe, uphill both ways, no shoes, carrying your siblings. I get it. It was hard for you. And so we've got Uncle Joe figured out. And what that does is it makes us fall asleep to the wonder that is sitting right in front of us. And when we disconnect because we think we have someone sorted out, that relationship starts to slip. But something interesting happens when someone blows our minds every now and again. Like you're sitting at the table and you got the whole family over and Grandma Ethel's just recounting her life and she's telling stories you've heard 1,000 times, and then she just slips in. And then there was that time we stole the car and went to Vegas. And you're like, wait, okay, stop, time out, Grandma. We need to back up to where you are stealing cars and driving to Vegas. Oh, yes, and then we stopped and we knocked over that liquor store on the way because we needed food. And you're like, wait, okay, all right, I thought I knew everything, and now I'm on shaky ground. And all of a sudden, that withered old lady whose stories are old and outdated is springing alive right before your very eyes. And you realize in that moment, I don't have you all figured out. I thought I knew you. It was muscle memory. I was tuning you out, but now I've never been more focused. Tell me more. What else don't I know? If that's true about our human relationships, how much more true of that is about our relationship with God? God is not going to be put in a box. God is not going to fit neatly and gently into our little categories. He's not going to perform the way we want God to perform. Even what I just said there, He is not going to perform, is a misnomer. Because God is not a He, and God is not a she, and God doesn't fit neatly into the categories that we clutch onto. And here's another illustration of that fact. John's gospel opens up talking about the mystery of the universe bursting forth. That the very word, the very logos, the very genesis of all creation became flesh, became human, and dwelt among us. And you would have think the story would continue and people were in awe and wonder. Everybody just sobbed openly in amazement and followed this person but that's not how the story goes. John says, He came to His own, and they received Him not. This Joseph's son, the carpenter's son, this guy with no education, this guy who didn't come from a big family like that, are you serious? And if you look at the story, His followers, Jesus did gain a following, and he did get to the place where He could walk to a hillside and start talking, and a crowd would form. But at one point, the very same people who were worshiping Him are the very same people who said, "We got you wrong. This isn't what we signed up for. Crucify Him." And in fact, His very best friends, He's talking about the kingdom coming. He's talking about resurrection. He's talking about new birth. And they're listening to all this stuff. Yeah, that sounds cool, Jesus. And then the moment Jesus is killed, they think it's over. Well, we had a good run. I thought that was going to be more, but, well, better luck next time. And so they go hide out, because they don't want to end up the same way Jesus ends up. But thankfully, there were some ladies in the mix who went to a graveside. By the way, just this little side note, the ladies always know first, fellas. So let's just stop. You can clap at that. They did first service. Ladies, you can clap. Ladies always know, okay? They always know first. It was only in hindsight, after the fact, long after the story, that we could read passages like, in Christ was all of God in a human body. In the person of Jesus Christ was all of the essence and the beauty and the wonder and the nature of God wrapped inside a human body. But that didn't happen in the moment because they were too familiar. They didn't even believe Jesus was the King, let alone God in skin. But God doesn't show up the way we want God to show up. God will not sit neatly in our categories. That's not how it works. And so we look at the world around us and we ask, if there's a God, why is all there so much suffering? If there's a God, why are so many people hurting? Why are so many people forgotten and marginalized? Why do the bad people get successful and the good people die? Why does the world work this way if there's such a loving God? And we should ask these questions. The moment we stop asking these questions, there's probably something going on with us. We've lost our empathy. We've lost our ability to care. But I wonder, how often do we ask questions like, why is there so much goodness in the world? Why are there people who go against their best interest, go against their own personal safety to help other people? Why are there people who put their own lives on the line for complete strangers or even enemies? That doesn't make sense evolutionarily. That we would put ourselves, maybe for our children, maybe for our families, maybe for ourselves, but for a stranger, for an enemy? Do we ever stop and ask why we do that? Why the world is like that? And we ask things like, why do parents leave their own children? How could a parent leave their own children? I wonder, though, do we ever stop and ask, why are there people who take in other people's children as their own without even thinking? Who integrate them into their family as if they're blood, with no question? Why would people jump into a river, risking their own lives to pull complete strangers out, with no camera crews around, no cash reward, no benefit to them other than the fact that it's there and it needs to be done? Do we ever ask those questions? Because in 1 John it says, no one has ever seen God. And here's what we do. We say, you know what? If God was real and if God cared and if this thing was supposed to be a certain way, why wouldn't God just show up and say something? Why wouldn't God tell us this is how things should be? Why wouldn't God show us goodness? Why do we have to guess? Why do we have to wonder so much? If God showed up and stood right in front of me, then I would know and then I would embrace. But here's what that passage goes on to say. If we love each other, God lives in us, and His love is brought to full expression in us. To which I would say, if God only showed up, and I would say, well, God is showing up in the person sitting right next to you this morning. And God has shown up in the person looking at you in the mirror today. that we have seen the fingerprint of God many times. But because it doesn't come in the categories that we expect or the way that we were told it would or the things that we're comfortable with, we miss it. And yet God is sitting right next to us today. Yes, even the person you rode here with, even that person, God is within them. Even the person you might have had an argument on the way to church with this morning, God rests within them. And the capacity to love and be loved is right there. And when we see that, God and the love and nature of God is brought to full expression right before our very eyes. Here's what I want to say. You and everyone you meet, every stranger, every person you've taken for granted, every person you've become so familiar with that you no longer see them, is a godly mystery. Something amazing happens if we can sit in that idea. Because if we can really get that somewhere here, what is racism? How could that ever be a possibility? If the same essence, if the same goodness, if the same love, if the same wonder that brings forth the universe is resting in me, it's also resting in anyone and everyone, regardless of the tone and shade of their skin, the culture from which they come. What would xenophobia be? How could we possibly pit religions against each other where we think we're superior, where we think we have the corner on everything, where we think we're the ones who finally seen the full picture? That would go away in an instant. Homophobia would not have a place. Because if I'm made in the image of God, so are you. Sexism. This idea that one gender is more superior or better suited to lead or... Do you understand how simple and ridiculous those notions would become? And they would fall away with a breath. This is what it looks like to lean into and embrace the mystery, because it's not just a metaphor. When you hug someone, you are actually embracing a mystery. You don't have people figured out. You don't have yourself figured out. But there's beauty in not knowing. And there's beauty in letting down the need to know. I said that most of the people who were at that lecture that day walked away disappointed. Because they didn't get what they came for. But there were a few people left in the crowd who sat with tears streaming down their face. Because they understood something. This brilliant, educated, passionate person who stands up here speaking things with such confidence can do so because they're not clutching to everything they know, but their hands are open to newness. They are looking to be amazed. They're not putting the universe in categories, in boxes, because they know that that is a fool's errand. In their lives, their hearts, their hands, and their minds are open to wonder. Someone said, have a mind that is attached to nothing and open to everything. It's not that God isn't knowable. That's not what I'm saying. It's that God is infinitely knowable. It means as soon as you think you've leveled up somewhere in your understanding of God, the rug gets pulled out and it's even more beautiful. It's even more amazing. It's even more mind-blowing. And just when you've started to settle into your opinion and it starts to crystallize and harden, it's melted right before your very eyes because God won't be put in those categories. Something amazing happens when we let go of our need to know and we open up for our capacity to wonder.